Good afternoon. This is Rebecca Martin. I am the Executive Director of NASH, and I'm really pleased to be able to welcome you today to our TS3 webinar on student academic readiness for a COVID fall semester. We, as many of you know, have been having ongoing webinars at the system level, talking about the challenges of supporting our systems, our campuses, our faculties, our staffs, our students during this period of time. And we're really pleased today to be moving this discussion to broaden the discussion to include all of the TS3 campuses. So thank you very much for joining us. We're really pleased to have you be part of this conversation today. So before we turn to our panel, I just wanted to give you a heads up about the partnership that NASH now has with the System Center. You will recognize some of these folks if you've been around NASH events for a while. Nancy Zimfer and Jason Lane have long been a part of the TS3 network and the Leadership Academy. Maria Khan and David Epstein-Halevi have also provided us with a great deal of support. And the System Center now is really functioning as the backbone for NASH, and particularly in this COVID-19 environment, we have really needed their support, and it's because of their active involvement that we have been able to provide the resources that we hope have been useful to you during this period of such challenge. So today we're going to focus on students, and we have three panelists joining us: Jeff Galle from the University System of Georgia, Tami Smith from the University of Maryland, College Park, and Yvonne Villanueva-Russell from Texas A&M Commerce University. Moderating is Jason Lane, who is the director of the System Center at the University of Albany. And so with that, I will turn this over to Jason.
Great, thanks Rebecca, and welcome everybody. We are thrilled to have you all with us for this really important conversation with our experts here on the panel. Over the past several months, we all have been grappling with how to deal with COVID-19. My other job is actually being a dean of a school of education. And so like many of you have tried to figure out on the ground, how do we make these pivots and help our students continue their learning and do it in a remote fashion. And we've spent a lot of time, both in our day jobs and on these webinars, talking about what it has been like to try to make those pivots and adjust very quickly. Of course, as we've done that, those have implications, I think, longer term as we think about the fall start and the academic preparedness of our students. Both K-12 and higher education have moved to remote education. So the pipeline of new students coming in, as well as those continuing between semesters, certainly have had their learning, at least their traditional learning, disrupted in a number of ways. And as we think about the fall, there are a number of questions that have yet to be answered about what the fall will look like. But one of the important things that we need to be thinking about is the academic readiness and preparedness of our students who will be with us. And so our panel here are folks who have been thinking about this for a while, and we've prepared a set of questions to sort of get the conversation going and to keep it flowing. But we also invite you to use the chat box in Zoom to offer other questions you might have, and we'll try to intersperse those as much as possible and to get to as many as possible. So to start, the first question I'd like to pose to each of them, and I asked them to reflect on this beforehand, was simply, now that we're, I don't even know how many weeks into this, 8 weeks or plus into this, it's time flies. What are you thinking about in terms of academic readiness of students and those who will be joining us in the fall? Just quickly, what's top of mind for you right now? And Tami, you're top of my screen, so maybe I'll turn to you first.
Hello. Yes, so just at the top of mind, we've been thinking about readiness in a really broad way. So I know you talked about academic readiness, but we also know that academic readiness is also influenced by other factors. So one of the things that we've been talking about in the University Systems of Maryland is the defining readiness around academic readiness, but also understanding student motivation, socio-emotional status, technological readiness. So all these factors come into play in our conversation. And I think most recently, things are not stagnant. This is a dynamic situation, and I think it will continue to be dynamic throughout the fall. So we're preparing faculty and so forth to be flexible. But we're also considering the context both of COVID and then also, also the racialized violence that's happening in our communities. And we think that those will also impact readiness as well.
That's great. I appreciate that. I mean, readiness, of course, covers multiple angles, and we've got to be thinking about all those various intersections. Moving across my screen now, Yvonne, you're next up.
I think I would reinforce a lot of what Tami has said already. I think the pandemic and also this moment of history in which we're facing the opportunity for social change based on social justice and racial inequities is a real opportunity for us to redesign the educational space that is aligned with the lived experience of our students, increasing the accommodation and the flexibility that's in our programs, and also redesigning educational programs that are aligned with our changing economic times. What programs are really needed in the workplace today. So that's top of mind for me.
Great. Yeah, really thinking about sort of how do we respond in the programmatic way to these things and think about innovation in the space. Great. Jeff, how about you? What's happening in Georgia?
The first two speakers are way over my head. My nose is on the ground. I'm thinking about 26 institutional reports, some 200 pages each, that the chancellor requisitioned from the 26 campuses. And so I was one of the reviewers, and what emerged in multiple readings of these reports that are now back in the hands of presidents is the overarching question of are we ready? Are we ready? And what will that mean if we're not? And then how are our students equipped or not for this moment, for this return to campus? We'll be returning to face-to-face campus. So all of the social issues, they're bringing that with them. The technological stuff that we learned, the lacks, the gaps that we had back in March that have been somewhat remedied, and all of the efforts between March 16th and June 16th, that's the 16th, here we go, that are ongoing 24/7. So there's a lot in play right now.
Yeah, absolutely. So thinking retrospectively a little bit, we asked our faculty to do a lot in terms of maintaining continuity of learning and preparedness. And of course, I look at K-12 and there was all sorts of discrepancies on sort of how they responded at times. And I think we probably have seen the same in higher education about instruction. In some cases, just maintain learning best you can. Others, no new instruction. I think for most of us in higher education, we encourage our faculty to move remotely and do as much as you can, although with lots of flexibility around issue grading and sort of attendance and things, trying to be empathetic to where other situations of our students. For you all in your different contexts, just as you think about this, what do you think were the biggest challenges for your faculty as they were trying to maintain continuity of learning, which of course feeds right into student preparedness to take on the next step of learning, right, come fall semester. And so, Yvonne, maybe I'll start with you first.
Sure. I think I'll mention two things, which maybe will leave enough space for Jeff and Tami to feel free to sort of build on or to take this in a different direction. But I think one of the main challenges for faculty was just wrapping their heads around the mindset shift that is necessary to do quality online teaching. So it isn't simply trying to replicate what you were going to do in the face-to-face classroom and then cramming it into a synchronous online space, which was not possible for our students to keep up with. But it was really faculty really trying to understand, how do I enable opportunities for my students to show what they know and what they have learned, maybe in a more flexible environment. I think the second challenge for faculty was, in terms of maintaining continuity of learning, was really trying to create a bridge for engagement with students. I've heard numerous faculty talking about the difficulty of students just participating in real time, not only because of life circumstances and technology, but also just that reluctance through Zoom to turn on their camera, and how difficult it is to have a lecture in which there's nothing but names or there's just you recording for future time. So kind of recreating that community in which there can be dialogue in a synchronous or asynchronous online environment was a huge challenge for our faculty.
Great. Jeff, how about you?
Multiple challenges emerged from these moments, March the 16th to now. So there's a question of varying resources. We have faculty who are superb at online teaching and have won awards and recognitions for this modality. And then there are those whose default is face-to-face. So that difference has been something of a challenge to for them to get their minds around, as Yvonne said, and also to equip them with answers to questions that they have. And then there's just a wide array of the resources issue. There are people at the research institutions who have 3 numbers to call if there's a question. And then there are those at state colleges who may be the only person in the phone book, you know. And so how do we do everything from the work with student success across faculty generational divides to the move online, remote, synchronous and asynchronous work? So yeah.
Yeah. It's a really great point. In my own school, we have a number of online programs. We're rated nationally for them, you know, and so we have folks who have done this for a long time, and our faculty have been turned to be able to be leaders in this. The other half of my faculty, other programs, counseling psychology, you know, school psych, that is so foreign as an idea to try to get them moving. So it was interesting to be in that space of some real experts and know how to do it, others very reticent historically, and having to pull them along into this space and try to find those balances. So yeah, even within small units, it's a fascinating experience to try to navigate.
Yeah.
Tami, how about you? Oh, Tami, are you there? Tami, did we lose you?
She may be muted, I'm not sure.
Can't hear, okay. Can you talk? We'll see if we can get her back here.
Okay.
In a minute. And
Can you hear me?
oh, now
Can you hear me?
We can hear you.
You can hear me? I can't hear you.
Okay.
I'm not sure why that is. Let me see if I can. All right, can you say something now?
Yes, can you hear us?
I can't hear you. That is so bizarre.
All right.
We can type it in a chat box.
Yep.
Chat
Yeah,
box.
the chat box maybe.
I'm just going to type it here.
So my husband is also teaching his class online right now, so I don't know if that's part of the problem. I can. Thank you. So this is a wonderful example of access to education that were struggles our faculty faced. They really talked about the inequitable access to their classroom. About 31% of them actually said that their students could not fully participate in all course activities. And so that was one major thing. Another one was engagement. As Yvonne mentioned before, that there was a real difficulty in how do we engage with students in this very different space in a very different time. And at the University of Maryland at College Park, we have some student data that sort of corroborates that as well. So when they asked students to compare classes that made the transition relatively successfully and courses that did not, the number one factor that was different for them was the engagement, the agreement with my instructor kept me engaged in the course. And so with those that were successful, they had 68% agreement with that statement, whereas those that were not, it was 17%. So we know that that engagement is a really important piece. Some of the other things that our faculty struggled with, we've done some both qualitative and quantitative survey data analysis. And some of the other things that they struggled with were what to do about this inequity, and some people not recognizing their own privilege within the class, but then also how to balance flexibility and rigor, so to speak, right? So when should we be compassionate? And when do we really need to help them learn? And some of the students were demanding, you know, I need to know this material. And other students were like, I am really at capacity and I can't do that. So I don't know if there's ways for systems to allow people to highlight that. Because another challenge they faced were, what do I do with students that disappear, right? And so the term MIA or absence without leave were used throughout our surveys. So kind of figuring out how much do I keep probing to talk to someone. I will say, I have to say that some of the exciting things were that the faculty reported they felt that they were much more, they and their students were more resilient, flexible, and adaptable than they had anticipated. And that overwhelmingly we had faculty that said, you can teach an old dog new tricks, and I learned so much. Mm-hmm. And also the idea that I learned something about my own teaching. So when I switched to online, I realized that this would be really helpful for me to do, even if we switch back to a face-to-face situation. So those are a couple of things. And I appreciate you continuing to text me.
Absolutely. So thinking about the flip side of that, we talked a little bit about the impact of students. We talked there about faculty challenges. You know, from your perspective, what do you think have been the biggest impact on student learning? Particularly, where are you seeing disparate impact in different groups of students or types of institutions, however you might want to think about that? And then what are you doing to try to address those issues right now? And so, Yvonne, maybe I'll go to you first, and I will chat here with Tami quickly.
Sure. Again, I'll just choose two individual cases, and hopefully that gives enough space for the other participants to touch on different areas. In terms of what are we doing in regards to getting ready for the fall semester? A lot of it is guesswork, as Jeff has talked about, just trying to get ready for the unknown. We are on-ramping our online tutoring capability. We are looking into online proctoring for some of the concerns that faculty have raised. We know that in terms of the impact it's had on our students and their preparedness for the fall semester, a lot of our students, there's a concern that maybe they didn't learn in as deep a way as possible and perhaps did not gain the foundations they needed for their upper level courses, hence the need for us to have the academic support teams, the peer mentors, the tutors on call, on ready to help those students on ramp in the fall semester if we find that they're at a deficit from where they should have been from the spring semester. I can also speak to adult learners. We serve a lot of adult students, the average age is 38 in our program. We're finding that a lot of them are needing a break. They're fatigued, they're tired. Their spring semester was spent working 18-hour shifts, homeschooling their children, and trying to fit in their school at 2 a.m., like when the computer was open. And so a lot of them are stopping out, and that's a reality that we face today. So the imperative for us is to give them the time to breathe, but then give them the support they need so that they don't lose that momentum towards graduation.
Yeah, I think it's a really great point, and that balance issue is quite an issue. I think for those of us who are homeschooling, and I'm in a more privileged position, it's difficult to balance it all right now, and it has a huge effect on our students. Tami, can you hear us? Excellent. Yeah, we can read it on your face.
Nice.
But Yvonne, let me go back to something you said, which was, you know, you've got the tutoring on call and you're sort of preparing that infrastructure for those who may not be ready. How are you going to identify those students who may not be ready to make sure they're aligned with the resources?
We haven't addressed that question yet. We are an EAB school. I fully anticipate leveraging that tool in terms of an early alert, right? Usually we wait till week 4. Maybe we have an early alert that is early intervention that's launched week 2.
Yeah, great. Jeff, how about you guys?
Okay, let's see. We have developed some resources for students that are web-based resources, and I did not send the links because I was busy with another project, but I can paste 2 sets of links in the chat box.
That'd be great.
Okay. So Dr. Denley initiated a project with the CETLs and the Affordable Learning Georgia and the OER staff to come up with just a massive list. Okay, so this is said with, it's a caveat, a massive list, right, of resources, which we vetted and then simplified, and that became the Keep Teaching page. And it's still way too much for the kind of learning that needs to go on. The second one is more to your question, the Keep Learning resource. And there are others in the USG set of pages that have to do with resources for students to find free courses from area libraries, free courses of Affordable Learning Georgia. So, but all of that assumes a kind of, access that may not exist. So we're building all of this on one side and inviting students to come through. So there are those sites, and we have multiple programs that we're offering, like a webinar series that is the faculty CETLs are offering 1 or maybe 2 per week through July. And those are outreaches to area faculty, USG faculty, and we're hoping that the content of those goes on to students through the CETLs. Another thing is the best practices that have come out of these institutional reports. I have a spreadsheet in front of me, and I'm just going to read 2 things. There's a lot more there because there are 12 categories of these reports. But under the student success tab, just suggestions from 1 or 2 or 3 institutions that became a pattern or a motif that we think could become a capital P practice. So training opportunities for mentoring, student mentors on campus, SI mentors or other mentors, using virtual, so for us it would be D2L, but using the LMS for advising, creating training for students to communicate with faculty through the virtual access. Mm-hmm. Let's see, that was more than 2 probably. Oh, I guess the last one, survey students early in the term to assess their technology and connectivity threshold or access, and then respond accordingly. So some of the things are occurring already with the programs and the websites and the resources. You know, I still feel like there's a huge gap, a chasm between the 350,000 students that we have and all of these efforts that are targeted. They're intentional, they're intelligent, but it's almost like this, you know, who's out there kind of thing.
Right. Yeah, if you build it, will they come, right? I think that's the
will they come?
Places we're building things, but we've got to find ways to get it to them. And if they don't have the technology to access it, yeah, spot on. You know, one thing I'll highlight, you know, Jeff, thank you for putting those links here in the chat box. So direct people there. A few weeks ago, we had another webinar for to our participants who we had folks from, at that time, Maryland, SUNY, and Wisconsin talk about sort of resources for teaching in particular, and what systems are doing to support teaching. I think Jeff put one of the links here for Epson, Georgia. So Maria Khan, if I could ask you, maybe if you got those links yet that were shared for those teaching resources from the other systems, we could put those here in the chat box as well so people can see other sites that are focused on teaching. So Tami, now that we have you back, your thoughts on sort of the impact on students and how Maryland's helping to prepare them for the fall.
Absolutely. And I don't think we've got the end all be all yet. We're going to get there. But we've had great conversations both at individual institutions, but the really exciting thing now is that the Kerwin Center has brought us together system-wide, and we have formed a readiness assessment working group. That's how we came up with this sort of broader definition I was talking about earlier. And really, our focus is kind of on this campaign of we are here for our students and we want to meet them where they are when they get here in that transition back in the fall. So what we've agreed to do as a group is to co-create a primer for faculty that will be posted on the Kerwin website, and everyone will have access to it. The first part would be a compilation of sort of general findings from student surveys across the institutions, so that they have a picture kind of the broader system and then also their individual institutions. What's going on? What are the trends that we are seeing in the student data that we have? And then the second part will really be sort of some recommendations around assessment, strategies and methods that they might implement, I think as Jeff had mentioned at the beginning of the term, but also maybe ongoing throughout the term to help them inform their instruction, because we know that things will change, and so checking in with the students in that regard. As far as at the University of Maryland at College Park, we are, right now we have several programs and initiatives that are kind of going on, and I can put our link also into ours is keepteaching.umd.edu, where all of our resources are and access to our webinars and so forth. But right now we're running some design sprints to help faculty plan for transitioning to online learning, and also be flexible and adaptable in that. We have some innovation grants, which are wonderful, because I know that a lot of our faculty were feeling, quite frankly, underappreciated, right? They were working harder than they ever have before, and in really tough circumstances. And I think, Yvonne, I missed all of it, but this, this work-life balance is really, really tough. And for those who had children, the homeschooling was like 75% of them are really struggling with homeschooling, right? So they were doing this extra work in a way that they're not, and doing their job in a way that they're not used to. And also some of them are fearful of furloughs and losing their position if they're not in a tenure track position. So there's a lot of that sort of stuff going on. So we try to keep that in mind and be sensitive to that. So the great thing is that we have these innovation grants now. So people, as they're working on redeveloping their courses for the fall, they're actually getting some financial support for that. And then also we at the Teaching and Learning Transformation Center are working with the Division of Technology as well to help them. And part of our conversation in our webinars include, how do you check in with your students? How do you assess readiness? Trying to encourage faculty to talk within their departments or units to understand, if the students took your class first, Jason, I want to know, like, what is your thinking about what are they going to be struggling with, and how can I respond to that? So those are some of the conversations we're having at both the system-wide level and at the institutional level. And I will say one thing that we haven't quite figured out yet is we don't want to over-survey students. And so if there's a way that we can get their overall status or whatever to get to everyone, and then the nuances of a course could be asked within the course, but to ask a student in every single course to ask the same questions is really difficult.
Yeah, that's a great point. And sort of the idea of trying to match up what faculty are saying, how far did they get, right, in the fall and in the spring, and drawing on that information seems to make a lot of sense, as well as forming these communities of practice and learning with each other. One thing you've referenced, Tami, in your comment was a little bit about the budget implications, right? The furloughs, concerns there. John Bierman raised a question here about budget cuts, and I think a lot of what we're talking about in terms of interventions are add-ons, right? These are additions that are going to have likely some level of cost associated with them. We might be able to pivot and adjust EAB the way I think Yvonne talked about, right, without too much of a cost, but other interventions will take some additional cost, additional tutoring, and things like that. So I'm just, I'm wondering now, as you all reflect on the current situation, I know we follow the headlines. It's not just in any one system. A lot of systems are facing budget issues, and here in SUNY, we're waiting to figure out what the actual state budget cut will look like and what the fall enrollments will look like, and we're all trying to read our crystal balls. How are you thinking about this balance of uncertainty around budget situations and a likely cut at some level? You may be different, but in a lot of cases, people are looking at cuts versus the need to expand some of these resources to support our students. So that tension there of budget and preparation and support. Any thoughts? And I'll open up to any three of you on how we balance those things, or how you're balancing those, or how you're thinking about it.
Jason,
Yep.
One response to that is to redesign existing programs. I know with one instance, we have a system-wide program of learning communities that have been focused on student success pedagogies, and it was renewed for 2 more years. That's great. And then we thought, well, let's look at this, because we're looking at, I don't know what your number is. It was first 14% cut, and now maybe 11% cut. And so, that's sponsored funding, but content-wise, if things are shrinking, then what about retooling an existing program to meet the need of faculty? So in this case, it would be faculty development on student pedagogies, but with change the topics to focus on something like hybrid HIPs or online redesign or synchronous. What are the advantages of face-to-face, synchronous, and asynchronous modalities? So we've written the proposal. Tristan will say yay or nay, and we'll see where that goes. But that would be one approach. It wouldn't increase cost, it'd be the same cost.
Right. So taking what you have already and pivoting it in a way that sort of better aligns with where the future's heading.
Yeah.
Great. Yvonne or Tami?
Similarly, I think we've totally reshaped what we're doing and how we're supporting faculty to this, right? And so we're meeting that need. And honestly, I am so excited because people are learning really good pedagogical techniques and strategies that they might not have ever thought to ask us about before. And so, so covertly, I'm kind of, you know, like this is a real thing to leverage, right? We have people's attention and they're seeing that these things are helping them, right? It's making their job easier, actually. If we can give them some clear support and direction, that can alleviate some of the pressure and tension.
Yvonne, anything to add? You're in Texas. You probably don't have any budget issues.
Not at all, no. Similarly to Jeff, I think it's just leveraging your existing resources in new ways.
Yep.
So we have an army of student workers that cannot work in the rec center because it's closed. So can we marshal them to be pseudo advisors and peer mentors, calling and texting the students that have virtually dropped out? You know, can we use EAB? Can we use D2L in new ways that we hadn't before without any additional cost? So it's just being savvy and innovative.
Yeah, no, it's a really great point on sort of repurposing resources that may not be used in the traditional ways. I know for me, as I think about some of these things, you know, uncertainty about adjuncts, for example, maybe having to cut some of them because of budget issues, which will force increases in course sizes, which in some cases, because of the capacity issues, will put those over our ability to actually house them on campus if we wanted them on campus and we were to be, you know, have these huge online sections moving forward, just out of sort of because of the budget. But there's so many dominoes in play, right?
Right.
If you do one thing, it's going to affect another, but you have this whole issue with like how many students can we actually have on campus? So how big a class can we actually house? And just a lot of interplay that it'll be interesting to see, I think, how it all works out comes fall.
It could be potentially, you know, catastrophic or potentially mild. We don't know which way it's going to go. Now, I like what Tami said about being able to see the positive in this, you know, crisis. I think that, you know, what Cuomo said the other day, never let a good crisis go unused or a good catastrophe. So this, I mean, that's exactly the faculty who don't use the LMS are using the LMS. The faculty who, you know, shy away from online or blended or all of that, they're using that. And so with nurturing and support, this could be a huge step forward for students and for faculty.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. And I think it goes back to the point you made earlier about engagement, right? How we're meaningfully engaging them in that. Tami, you came off mute.
Yeah, I want to add to that. I absolutely agree with you. The other thing that I'm hopeful for is that in this, we increase accessibility, because by having to be flexible and allowing for, students are allowed to select to come to class remotely. So that means that every faculty member will have to have a platform for a student. So if a student has a family member that gets sick, or if they get sick or they miss for whatever reason, there'll be a parallel system within the LMS that they can still follow along and keep caught up with what we're doing. So we get away from this sort of thinking of, how do I create something special for your special need and situation, to creating a space for learning that everyone automatically has access to, right? We have ramps in all buildings now so that people who are in a wheelchair can have access without, you know, I don't have to think like, oh, do I have this ramp that I can pull out somewhere to help you because you have this special, and I want to be really careful for you, but no, you just have access, come on in. And that's where I hope that we end up at the end of this.
I really love that analogy. I'm actually going to borrow it because I think that's great. You know, and I'll ask you here, you know, one of the things I hear from some faculty on that issue of multiple RAMs is you're asking me to do more, and now I'm teaching 2 courses, not 1 course, right? And you know, we counter that with the example you gave. You know, there's multiple ways to approach the class. So we've got to give people flexibility in the environment. But I'm just curious, you know, for you all, how are you approaching the faculty workload issue? As faculty are expected to do a little bit more, do it differently, particularly in the fall. Spring, we got a bit of a pass, right? We were able to shift quickly to this remote education, crisis education. Come fall, the expectations are going to be much greater, I think, from our students, and rightly so, about what that experience is going to be like. So, Yvonne, maybe I can ask you how you're thinking about that.
Sure, and I speak from the perspective of just one single regional comprehensive institution, so I can't speak system-wide, but I do know workload is going to be taxed, and you've really got to motivate your faculty that we're doing this for the best interest of our students. And it may mean sacrifice on all our parts, but our classes may be bigger. Our classes may be high flex. Our classes may suddenly need to go completely online. And I think if we can all aspire and commit ourselves to a shared set of values that are in the interest of our students, it's worth it in the end.
I think those innovation grants that Tami mentioned, I think you mentioned a minute ago. So yeah, workload, duh, yeah, it's going to be heavier lift. And even if they're doing a second or third or fourth or 15th time of doing this modality, there are still challenges for this particular moment. And my schedule changing, and my class size, and then all the ingress and egress, all of that is going to be a part of this. Yep. So if there are ways of honoring faculty for their excellence, awards, certificates. One of the things that we're working on is a thing called Faculty U, and it's brand new. It's not out. It's not something that Tristan has been able to say, here it is, but there's an instance of our Blackboard, our D2L, which is going to be exclusively devoted to faculty development. And so the short courses, the certificate courses, the badges, all of that, and it's going to be linked to HR. So if they, and this is system-wide, I know some institutions have that, and that's cool. At the system level, we have not. So whatever they earn will be a way to improve their portfolio. The money thing is great. I'm just wondering where that's going to come from. So I'm like, yeah, okay.
No, absolutely. It's a great point. And we're about halfway through, folks. So I just want to remind our participants, feel free to use the chat box. If you have particular questions you have for the group, so put those in there and we'll try our best to get to them. We've talked a lot about our current students and those who are continuing from spring to fall, but we have a whole crop of new students coming in, and those students are coming out of K-12 systems that have had really wide, I think, disparity in how they have responded to learning the past year. Some have tried their best to continue learning. Others have said, don't do any new instruction because there's disparate impact, because different students in different communities have different access to devices or Wi-Fi. And so I think, what we're likely to see even wider variation of preparation for our K-12 students or our seniors coming into college. Are you thinking at all about the sort of the new students who are coming in and their preparation for the start of the semester? Anybody want to jump in on that one?
We've definitely, we're having conversations about particular groups, and that is one that we've been focused on thinking about. I mean, this is tough. When we really put ourselves in their place, culturally, high school graduation is huge. And a lot of these students didn't get any ceremony outside of their home, maybe, or maybe a drive-through caravan. They did a nice one in our neighborhood, right? And so they're in like a different place and marking that transition to college. And if they are, or if they're not going off to college and they're still home, like all those things, I think will play into it. I think you're right. We always have had sort of discrepancy in, which students are going to have an easier time when they get there and which ones aren't, and there's likely to be a bigger gap there. But I think there's more and more conversation about how do we connect the students to having that feeling of community with the college, in addition to being new to disciplines and all of that. So, but I'm excited to hear. Do you guys have great ideas on?
It's an interesting point, though, sort of that psychological move, right? Graduation marks the end of something, and now for so many they would move on campus, right? Whether or not that happens, but there is an added element there too of that sort of that psychological move towards something new that may not be as evident. Yvonne?
Yeah, I don't think we can underestimate the power, the anthropological power of that rite of passage and that closure that gives a high school student for them to turn the corner and say, I'm an adult now. I can do things on my own. And our honors college is reporting that our students are, there are more of them that are missing deadlines, whereas normally they would autonomously be doing these things. So we need to hold their hand a little bit more. They need a little assistance on the way there. The other point that I wanted to make about our high school seniors is that I think the pandemic and the surrounding concern about racial injustice is laying bare inequalities even more. I mean, disproportionately, we are seeing those that already had an advantage moving further ahead. They were already in dual credit courses. They were already familiar with the online environment. And now, because they've had a semester online under their belt, they're ready for the fall semester should it be online. If you contrast that with remedial students who have the intersectionality of social class, race, maybe being rural, maybe having parents that have limited education themselves, they are not in an enriched environment. They are suffering summer slide, which started in March, and we're really going to have to reach out not only halfway, but maybe 3/4 of the way to get these students ready for the fall.
I totally agree with Yvonne, and I have 2 children. One was in 7th grade and one was in 5th grade this year, one in public and one in private. We had totally different experiences. And I think back at the faculty survey, right, that we gave, and 71% said they were struggling with homeschooling. And if we're struggling, you know, what is the rest of the community struggling with? I also want to point out that there are some resiliencies that people have developed. There are, you know, they've learned new ways of coping and interacting and getting by. A lot of these students had to become independent. They can't just go to the teacher when they have a question. Maybe they have an office hour where they can call in with a question, but they have to grapple with it. And so I think I don't want to underestimate, I don't want to deny that there might be some special needs that they have that are unusual compared to other circumstances, but I think we also should tune into, like, in some ways they are going to be independent and thriving in ways that maybe previous students hadn't.
I can just add 1 or 2 small things to this this question. And so I'm thinking more, looking at the reports that have come in from the institutions, more about modifying our requirements that will make the arrival and the engagement of these students joining the academic community more easily. So relaxing requirements for a course, first-year seminar, or definitely adjusting the live on campus requirements in some cases. That was one of the things that emerged as a possible talking point. Roommate agreements, developing conversations early on. I know some institutions have had that for years. At Emory, we have that kind of process in place, but here, this is maybe a new idea in some places, starting conversations with new students as they share space in a very restricted kind of way. So res life halls, how are they going to change to accommodate the needs of these students, etc.
So picking up on that a little bit then, are you doing anything specifically about your first year experiences? So I think you mentioned a little bit there about sort of adjusting residence hall requirements. We may sort of, you know, provide relief for those 2-year residency requirements in some places. And I know here we've seen a reduced interest in our learning living communities, and, you know, people want to be on campus. And on the other hand, making sure we've got at least our first year experience classes on campus, you know, in person, while a number of others will be online. You know, what thoughts have you had about that first year learning experience? Because we know, right, research tells us that provides such an important transition point for students to be prepared for the rest of the college experience.
I know that West Georgia, North Georgia, and some of those that have really robust FYS programs are modifying it to include, as we're talking about redesigning existing programs, to include this moment in these discussions. I think the relaxing of requirements that I just read from the report about is more about things that would provide stumbling blocks or stumbling moments for students, but the you know, entry into, in a meaningful way, the academic community, whether it's res life, campus life work, or the coursework. I think flexibility is the recurring theme for a lot of this. Flexibility.
For our first year experience, we are still engaging in a block schedule model, even though it's virtual. So the students may never see each other, but they're in the same class and having a shared cultural experience across English and math and the first year experience class. We also have embedded supplemental instructors and peer mentors, which are stationed in multiple classes. So they're forming relationships, hopefully, as they would face-to-face in the online platform, so they know each other, they can lean on each other, and they've got a support network built up in an online fashion.
So there's a exchange going on a little bit here in the chat box, just about we get halfway into the semester or maybe a quarter in the semester, and we realize students don't know everything that they need to know, and this may vary by discipline, right? And the type of prerequisite that might be needed for certain courses versus others. You know, we've talked a little bit about the preparation in advance of the semester, maybe early in the semester, but all right, now we're halfway through and the instructors realized 25% or 50% of my students really don't know all those equations they need to build that bridge, right? For an engineering class. You know, where is the responsibility going to fall? Is the instructor going to have to be teaching that material in addition to what they're teaching already? Is there going to be supplemental instruction available? You know, Yvonne, you talked about tutoring already sort of being lined up and prepared for this. Just any more thoughts about that, the entirety of the semester, and where the responsibility is going to fall for this knowledge that we know some students likely should have, but we know may well not have given what happened in the spring?
Great question.
A stumper.
I hadn't thought about that yet. I was thinking about July.
I think that we're spending a lot of time working with faculty, and I know this might be a change in model. Like when I went to college, there was a midterm and a final exam, and they were worth a huge amount, and it was your responsibility to figure out what you achieved. This is sort of, these young people have grown up in a very different environment. I used to be in that teacher preparation program. Our department was a teacher preparation program, so I'm very closely familiar with what they do. We are encouraging faculty to do more formative assessment. What are low stakes, smaller pieces that you can ask? And some of them don't even have to be graded. You can just post them on your LMS. It allows the student to check in if your students want that ownership. You know, some of them want to be responsible adults and others want a little bit more help. And so if students know how they're progressing in a, you know, after a couple weeks in the semester, really, we should be able to give them a little bit of feedback. And then if it's formative, the whole point in that is for the faculty member to adjust instruction to meet the needs, because ultimately it is a responsibility of the faculty member to help the student attain the course, the desired outcomes of the course. And then I think with how you respond, well, the answer is that depends. If 75% of your students are missing a concept, that's probably something, and if material builds on it, that's probably something worth going back and reteaching, right? If you have a couple of students, then maybe you have a TA or someone that works with them individually, or if you don't have too many students, the faculty member could do that. If there's something that you know that they generally miss anyway, and you have resources that they can use, you post them in your space and you say, hey, if you need to brush up on adding double-digit numbers, here you go, or you know, whatever it happens to be. So, and I think that that's why it's really important to develop a climate within your classroom where students know how to and when to check in with you, and that faculty are getting a read, you know, checking their temperature, how are things coming, do we need to make a few adjustments? And so, and then it's not so daunting or overwhelming because it doesn't wait till halfway through and you're like, oh, how can I cover this second half of the material if they don't even know the first half?
Great point. Going back to the K-12 space, just for a minute, you know, one of the things we've seen lately is that cancellation of ACT, SAT exams. You know, for many of our incoming students, they probably would have taken it prior to the cancellations, but it has sparked a debate about ACT and SAT in general. I think in the U.S., a number of colleges have said they're going to move to not requiring it. And just, you know, your thoughts where your systems or institutions are on the ACT, SAT sort of debate, and what might the future look like in that regard? We're standardized tests.
I might pass. Yeah, go ahead.
And again, I'm speaking just from one institution, regional comprehensive, we're enrollment dependent. We are open access. So we're not maybe as selective as some of the other schools of the institutions that you work with. But for us, this pandemic has opened up an incredible opportunity for us to rewrite our admissions policies. And we are going ACT, SAT optional for the long term. This is not a temporary fix. This is an initiative that is going to address the value question and the equity issue that has plagued higher education for years. And for us, we are strong believers that the ACT and the SAT is not a valid measure of innate intelligence. Instead, our data shows us that high school rank is a better predictor of a student's capability and prowess to do well and conquer the freshman and proceed on to graduation. So we are heartily and enthusiastically moving into alternate measures and using ACT and SAT as just an option to allow students into our institution.
Tami, anything happening in Maryland?
So Friday will mark the 10th month of my arrival to the University of Maryland. I spent so I've spent 15 years being faculty at a small liberal arts college where we chose not to collect that information anymore, and there are a lot of Ivies that don't, and we had alternate, they could even apply by video for our programs. So honestly, I don't know for Maryland what their thinking is along those lines. That'll be the next, person I need to meet on campus.
Right.
Yeah, I think that at Emory, the AP exam series was more relevant because it gave students the opportunity to earn credit. That was the big deal. You want to go in with 35,000 hours of credit. These students want to go in advanced. But the ACT and SAT, I don't hear that conversation as much, and I'm sure that it's because of the company that I keep. Georgia Tech and University of Georgia would be interested in different kinds of things than state colleges. So maybe the alternative high school rank, I like that, Yvonne. That may be a better indicator of admissions.
So I'll pick up on the equity angle a little bit there. And Yvonne, you brought it in talking about sort of, obviously we know there are all sorts of equity issues associated with standardized tests, but there's no doubt that the pandemic has created all sorts of inequities and exasperated existing ones in many ways. And we see that playing out in the protests on a daily basis right now. But even before the protests, we knew that was happening in higher education, whether it's, access to technology, access to Wi-Fi, any number of other access points associated with different people are living and backgrounds. As you've thought about this equity angle a little bit, I'm just curious your thoughts on sort of how you're seeing it playing out in your particular area, particularly with COVID-19, and how that might be increasing equity or inequity in certain aspects. And anything that you're doing to sort of address that or try to tackle those issues right now. So big question. You can narrow it a bit, but I however you want to take that one. Yvonne, I see you reaching in, so I'll let you go.
I'm waiting like, Tami, Jeff, come on, take this one. And again, I can only speak from my little corner of the world, but I mean, it may be the time that the age of competency-based education may meet its dawn of legitimacy, right? And so competency-based education in which people can come in and self-pace their way through and accelerate, aimed largely at adults with partial college credit that need to come in and pivot for a career that doesn't exist yet because we've got these wild economic times. This may be an opportunity, and I think something like an asynchronous online teaching environment this is a huge opportunity. It's resilient to these types of scenarios. It doesn't matter whether you are homebound or whether you're working 18-hour shifts. It adapts to students' needs. And I think we are well past the time where institutions are set up with these preset concrete blocks, expecting students to fit into the institution. It's time for the institution to meld itself and wrap itself around the needs of our real students that are out there today.
Good point. Jeff?
Ditto what Yvonne just said with passion. That's fantastic. We've been talking about how to do that in classrooms, how faculty can decenter, not be the talking head. So the metaphors, the paradigm shift from the Boyer report up to date has tended to say work within the existing institutional model. So the classroom changes, the professors change, the active learning changes, but the whole program doesn't change until maybe this kind of moment that Yvonne talks about, describes. I think there is a huge potential for big change, not just simply my practices, but how we offer higher ed.
Yeah, I think that this is just a reiteration of what I said earlier about thinking about, like, how do we design the system so that it works for everyone? And the one thing I love about educational research is that we end up trying to understand how to meet the needs of particular groups. And once we solve that puzzle, we realize, guess what? That works for everyone. That's like, it's like it pays back for everyone. And so I think that there are some real opportunities. It's been nagging at me. I've been reading through these surveys we're doing some qualitative data analysis on, and these inequities are being uncovered in ways they hadn't been before, and the gap is growing, and faculty are recognizing it. And so it is an opportunity. And sometimes I'm like, I don't quite have the right answer for you yet, but this is a conversation that definitely needs to continue on. And I'm hopeful that it will improve education for all students.
We're rounding third, coming to home here. It's nearly 4 o'clock my time. And, to pick up on that theme, Yvonne, and, we talk a lot here in these groups about systemness. And in those conversations, we often talk about the idea that we need to, we've long designed around institutions, and we need to design around students, right? And we need to rethink the way that we are orienting ourselves, because the experience of a student is not necessarily the experience of an institution. So picking up on that, and my last question to our group, what is it that systems can bring in particular to these conversations around academic readiness and the response to COVID-19? The idea that we've got multiple institutions under one governing board that could work collaboratively in some ways. What is it about the system structure that might be able to help us better respond to or move forward some of these issues that would be different than an individual institution? And Yvonne, you're invited to bring an institution perspective into this also, but
Chapter 2, Yvonne, go.
I mean, I can just tell you from someone in the trenches, I desperately need my colleagues in the system, right? I don't have the expertise to cover what I need for my institution. And it's a shame that we don't pool our resources. There are experts in all sorts of areas that I could not possibly cover my own. We're stronger together. So I don't know what it is going to take, but maybe a pandemic, for us to open those lines of communication and bridge and break down those hierarchies between I'm the mothership and I'm the regional satellite. It's silly, right? We're all part of the team. We all need to meet the same goal. Can we help ourselves? Can we help each other?
The power of the system, a network, a true system, a true network, is in resources and sharing. And so I think of the city like a skyline with different size skyscrapers. And so maybe they're different height, different size, different buildings, but there's a subway beneath that connects everyone. And so it's like the system is the thing that provides the connection across all sectors, research, comprehensive, state, and colleges, and so forth. And this idea of reminding all institutions that we're in this together through the programming that we create, the creation of a common set of student pedagogies, for example, and then how to create this institutionally shaped report with system feedback. So those conversations that can occur at a system level can maintain those, that glue, the connections.
Tami?
I think they covered almost everything, right? The great collaboration across institutions, bringing that together, celebrating what everyone's doing well, appreciating the faculty for what they are doing, providing guidance or structures for how do we help students when X happens, or here are some resources that we're using at our institution, try them out, those sorts of things. So I think that maintaining those relationships and that dialogue so that we don't go back into silos is the key point. And I think there's a synergy that happens then when the people are together.
Great. Tami, Yvonne, Jeff, thank you so much for being with us today, for sharing your knowledge. We really appreciate you taking this time and this opportunity to learn from you. And I will turn it back to Rebecca.
So Jason, I don't think we could have had a better point to end on than that, at least for my day. Anyway, you made it. That's great. Thank you all for your great contributions. And thank all of you for taking the time out to be part of this. We really appreciate it. We appreciate all the work that you're doing in supporting your students and your faculty. And we know that the challenges are heavy for every one of you, so it's great that you took the time to be with us. I just wanted to alert you that our next webinar will be on July 13th. It's on taking our PK-12 partnerships to the next level. We really think we need them more than ever now. And we want to think with you about how to make those more effective than they've been in the past. And so watch your email space for that. We'll be announcing that one shortly. Jason, thank you again for moderating and doing a great job. Thanks to all the panelists, and I hope you all stay well, stay safe, have a great rest of your day, and we'll see you soon. Thanks a lot.
Take care, everybody.